The first time I had a supernatural experience, I was asleep in my room at my parents' house. Now, I knew this house was haunted because in the middle of the night, I would hear something banging on my walls or my doors, and our dog, who slept inside, would bark on and off during one night, and the next night be completely quiet. But on this particular night, I saw an angel. I later found out that there is an old refrigerator under our house. Ask me why, and I couldn't tell you. Anyway, about a month after we moved in, we bought a 6-year-old Shih Tzu puppy. About 2 days after we bought her, my fiance and I were sleeping when he woke me up and told me the dog was on the bed. This, of course, was impossible, since she was only 6 weeks old, had short legs, and our bed was tall, with nothing around it for her to jump on. He told me that he felt something tugging at the covers around his neck and growling, and when he rolled over it, ran, and jumped off the bed. I just passed it off as him dreaming. But about a week later, while he was at work, he works night shift, I was asleep, and I woke up because it felt like something was running from one end of the bed to the other, and back and forth. When I rolled over, it stopped. That kind of freaked me out. Then about 3 months later, I woke up and saw a hand coming out of our closet door with what seemed to be a letter or a piece of paper in its fingers. The hand was small and white. When I gasped, it disappeared. Then, about a week after that, the bed would periodically shake while I was asleep. I later asked my fiance if he ever felt the bed shake, and he told me he did. And when he described how it felt, I knew we were both feeling the same thing. It's a subtle shaking as if we're an earthquake, except we live in Virginia, where we don't have earthquakes, at least not the kind you can feel. It was almost as if there was a big dog on the bed, scratching furiously at a flea, and he also described it the way I would have, which is when you wake up, your first thought is, man, my heart beating that hard? And then you realize that it isn't your heart at all. And just last week, I saw a young woman with brown curly hair and brown eyes peering at me from a crack in the closet door. And last night, the downstairs bathroom door slammed by itself, and the bed shook with both of us on it. Usually, it only shakes with one of us on it. Anywho, that's my story. If you have any insight, please give it to me, and you can put the stories on your site. I've had the special gift of seeing those who passed on to the afterlife, often seeing those who have long departed Earth. It happens periodically, but when it happens, I have some pretty vivid and memorable experiences. This has been happening since I was 8 years old. One of the scariest ghost encounters I had was when I was 23. I was a teacher at that time, and when I first started teaching, it had gotten very late, and I was in school grading papers. I remember it started to violently storm for a few minutes, before it stopped after some time. At this point, it was so quiet. I was the only one in the school at the time. I had left the classroom door open when I heard a loud banging on the school lockers right outside the door. It startled me so much, I flinched so hard. I wanted to make sure it wasn't a break-in, so I went outside in the hall to investigate. That's when I was floored. Standing all the way down the hall near the lockers was a man in blue overalls with a long beard. He was holding an umbrella in his hands and looked so deranged. He honestly looked like a homeless squatter to me. I told him not to move at all, and that I'd be calling the cops, that I was armed with weapons, so if he tried anything, I'd attack, which wasn't true at all. I was bluffing, but I needed to scare him anyway. The next thing I know, the man starts charging at me full speed. I run back into the classroom I was just in, slam the door, and hide under the desk. I remember hearing the most intense scream for a second, coming from the hallway. The lights go out, and it's pitch black for a moment's time. I started to hear a couple footsteps. Then, silence. It wasn't until about 2 minutes later, the lights went back on. I screamed out loud, "I'm armed. You need to leave. You are trespassing. You don't belong here," etc. I waited a minute or so under the desk and eventually got out. Still quiet enough to hear mice. I opened the door and head out into the hallway. There was no sign of life. Nobody was there. No deranged, homeless man. Just nothing. The school is pretty small. It's 1 floor and about 10 classrooms. There are, of course, 2 entryways to get into the school, the front and back. I went to check the doors, and to my utter surprise, they had been both locked the entire time. I thought to myself, how could anyone break in? The doors are locked, no windows are open, and all of them are locked as well. Was I hallucinating? No, not at all, because the man looked as real as any person I could see. So, I made sure to check all the classrooms, even open the lockers, to make sure this man wasn't hiding in there. But there was no sight of this guy. I did end up calling the police. They checked out the school as well, and saw absolutely nothing. By morning, everyone was aware of what happened. I think they actually canceled school for the kids that day, because they were worried that a maniac was on the loose. I think they made the right decision. To this day, I have no idea what it was exactly. Of course, since I'm gifted, I lean towards the idea that this was a ghost. If it wasn't, then I'm really lucky I was unharmed. It could have been a lot worse, and I'm honestly thankful that it was just me that evening. I should mention that the school does have a history of oddities and ghostly phenomena. Supposedly there was a rumor that years ago, in the indoor pool at the school, a teacher went mad and drowned a student right in front of everybody. Legend has it that you could hear the moans and cries of a young person in the pool from time to time. One of the school janitors once swore that they saw a blue figure hovering right above the pool. Unfortunately, nobody took him seriously. He actually lost his job and was put into a mental asylum because he had a mental breakdown after seeing that. Anywho, that's my story and the surrounding rumors of this haunted school. I hope this was thoroughly entertaining. I don't work there anymore. I moved to a different state and work as a teacher currently. After what happened to me, I honestly couldn't stay. Thanks for reading. I'm from Dublin, Ireland, and when I was a boy, I forget how old I was, maybe about 14 or 15. I was staying with my parents with my old aunt and my family's ancestral home. There's a very old church just up the road from the house. It's so close that you can take a shortcut across just one field, and you're there. It used to be part of an old Franciscan monastery. Anyway, I was in that church on my own one summer's afternoon. It was a hot day, and though the church was naturally cooler, it was only a degree or so cooler. I remember feeling a little uneasy. All of a sudden, the hackles on my neck rose. I thought my little sister had followed me in, but then the temperature literally nosedived from somewhere in the high 90s to the mid 40s In a matter of seconds, I sensed that someone, or something, was watching me from the choir balcony, above and behind me. Something told me that it sure as hell wasn't human. I don't know how, but I knew. I slowly turned and looked up. 3 seconds later, I was tearing down the road as fast as my legs could carry me. What I saw was the semi-transparent, cowled figure of a Franciscan monk regarding me from the balcony. He was barely there, yet details, the folds of his robe, the heavy cross about his neck, and the shaded outline of a face was visible, yet weirdly see-through. I'm now 20, and still refuse to enter that church alone. I've since asked the parish priest about it. He explained that he had seen an apparition a couple of times when he was alone in the church, but refused to comment or speculate further. I still feel funny talking about this because the only people that seem to believe me are the children around here. You described some of the things that have happened in your number 2 list of types of ghosts, so maybe I'm not crazy. We moved to this 120-year-old farmhouse about 4 years ago. When we first moved here, my youngest son was 3. He would ride his tricycle back and forth from the living room to the kitchen, which at the end was the basement door. He would ride his tricycle back and forth from the living room to the kitchen, which at the end was the basement door. I was doing the dishes when he turned to me and asked me to stop laughing at him. I told him I didn't say anything, so he proceeded to go to the living room and back again. When he reached the basement door, he turned to me and said, "Can you hear them, Mommy? They're laughing at me." I left it alone, but I never forgot it. As time went on, little things would happen that really got my attention, like the smell of perspiration when nobody was around. It would only last a minute or two, and it would only be in one spot of the room. I would go to other parts of the room, but could smell nothing until I went back to the original spot, and it would still be there. I would also smell it as if it were just passing by, in front of me, and then be gone. This continued for the next year, and then one day, I laid down with my son for a nap. It was about 1 in the afternoon. I would wait until he fell asleep, and then I would get up, but before I could move, our bed started shaking for no reason. It only lasted a couple minutes. After that, things happened a lot. My 8-year-old started to get smacked in the leg when he was asleep. He would always come downstairs afraid after it would happen. I started getting nudged on my leg at night, like someone was trying to wake me up. I am a very light sleeper, so I'd wake up immediately and look all around my bed in my room, but nobody was there. One night, when I was sleeping, I felt something lay across my legs. I tried to move, but it was so heavy, so I started to kick real hard and crazy, and it went away. Again, nothing was there. My son was 5 when he asked me if I could see the man's work boots standing in my dining room. He would see black things floating by and asked if I saw them. He would describe them like shadows, but the clincher was, when we were all sleeping at 4 in the morning, and my dresser started shaking so hard, I thought it was going to fall over. I spoke to my pastor's wife about it, and she said they say a prayer every night that asks the Lord to protect them from any harm or evil. My children and I started including that in our prayers, but we added spirits also. We have never had another problem since, except I do still smell them from time to time. I do still hear footsteps across the ceiling when nobody is upstairs, but that's no problem. I don't mind. My mother, brother, sister, and I, moved into an old house in Cambridge, New York in 1995. They had the intentions of refinishing parts of the house to make it more modern. To give you an idea of the house, it was built in 1884, had 4 floors, which consisted of a basement, first floor, second floor, and a full attic. Above the attic there was a window's peak, and access was through the attic by a flight of stairs. Strange things started happening that everyone just brushed off the first week. Every night at 7 p.m. on the dot, the house would fill with the smell of cigar smoke. Nobody in the house smoked cigars. We could hear voices of adults upstairs and people running around. When we went up, no one was there. We heard knocking on the walls all hours of the day. People were heard whispering. It would get so intensely cold in the kitchen, and appliances would randomly turn on and off. My sister was coming down the stairs when she looked to be pushed from behind, and luckily my mother was at the bottom and saw the whole thing. My mother was never bothered at all. It seemed to target only the children, which were my sister, 11, my brother, 13, and me, who was 15. She did hear things, and she also felt things, but never scared out of her mind. One day, my mother came to me and said she had to show me something. She took me to the basement door and said, "Watch." She opened the door and turned a light switch off. Then she shut the door, waited for a few seconds, then opened the door, and the light was back on, and the switch was up. We then proceeded to do this over and over again, and the same thing occurred, so we duct taped the switch off. We left that night to visit family friends, and when we returned, every light in the house was on, even the basement, where it looked like someone tore the duct tape from the wall. We left the light on. From then on, everyone in the house had seen shadows and felt presences. My brother was the one who saw and felt the most. One day, he was home alone and said he saw 3 men in the backyard digging by the garden. He watched them for a few moments when one of them looked up at him and all 3 of them disappeared. He said the men looked as real as he did. He woke up one morning with 3 scratch marks down the front of his chest, and he said he didn't feel it, nor did he wake up during the night. My closet doors in my bedroom one night rattled uncontrollably while I was trying to sleep. This creeped me out so bad, I refused to sleep or even go into the room. The room became a used office, and me and my sisters opted to share a room. My sister said she felt something watch her whenever she was in the bathroom, and on one occasion, she said the shower curtain whipped open. I do believe her, because she ran out of the shower screaming and straight onto the front porch. We found out that the house was part of the Underground Railroad. When research was done on the house, it was found that it was also an underground bar during Prohibition. Many people lived in that house and also passed away in the house. A woman by the name of Ann Douglas hung herself in what was my bedroom. And we also know that there was also a shooting outside of the house, around where my brother saw the 3 men. There were so many incidences, but too long to tell all of them. We lived in the house for 5 months before selling it and moving out. We have heard that people have lived there or stayed a short time before moving out. The house is currently vacant. I wonder why. I had many paranormal experiences when I was young. As I grew older, I dismissed them as fantasy of the young mind. As I grew older, they became less, but 2, as an adult, stand out in my mind. One happened when I was in Germany, and the other didn't happen to me. The first time was when I was in Mittenfing, Germany. I was about 23 years old. I was new to the country, military, and looking for a place to rent. We, my ex, an atheist, and I, found one. Our apartment was on the second floor. The landlord lived on the first, and there was an attic. The first night we stayed there, I had a dream about a person named Caleb. I could not see his face. All I could see was a shadow behind curtains. He was asking my ex to come with him, and I kept saying no. I had the dream several nights, but I never told my ex my dream. About 1 month after we moved in, I started experiencing phenomena. We had a bathroom with a skylight. I had this unnerving feeling that someone was looking at me while I bathed. Keep in mind that this was an old German house, and showers are hard to come by. I also had the feeling of being watched when I went into the kitchen. Several months passed by, and winter came. We had a lot of snow, and it was piling up. One day, I was in the living room when I heard this sound in the attic, like someone was dragging something across the attic. I dismissed it as snow piling up on the roof and falling. The only problem was, the snow really was falling north to south, roof pitch, and the sound I was hearing was from east to west. I ignored it for about 2 weeks, and the sound got so loud that I had to leave. My ex found me sitting on the landing one day and asked me what the problem was. I told him what I was hearing, and he laughed and told me it was the snow falling off the roof. I told myself, giggling, "You're losing it." Several days went by, and I kept hearing the sound. I did ignore it, but one day, I tried to lay down on the couch when I heard this sign next to me. I left the apartment again, but one night, we had a party, and my ex told people that I was hearing things. They laughed, and I was embarrassed, but I told them open the attic door, which was between the bathroom and kitchen, and see what was up there. They did, and everyone stopped laughing. I didn't really want to see what was up there, but then again, I did. My ex told me there was nothing up there but old rags. He tried to persuade me from looking, but I wanted to see for myself, so I climbed up the stairs and looked in the attic. What I saw took my breath away. There was an old black German baby buggy sitting up there. It was full of cobwebs, and someone pushed it, and I knew what that dragging sound was. It made a distinct sound that could be heard by everyone. I actually felt sick to my stomach. We stayed there for about another month, and nothing happened. Then one night, we laid down to go to sleep when I heard this knocking on the wall above us. 3 knocks. I asked my ex if we had heard that, and this is what he said. I'm going to tell you I didn't, but I did. Well, it was about 2 weeks after that when my ex told me we were moving. I didn't know it, but he was looking for another place. No explanations. We were just moving. As we were moving, I asked him why, and all he said was, "Let's leave this place." I asked him why, and he got really mad and told me we were just moving. Well, we moved, and about 6 months later I asked him why we moved, and he told me that he looked up to the kitchen window, and there was a man looking down at us. I know there was nobody left in there, because I was the last person to leave. He also told me he was experiencing the same things I was, but wouldn't tell me, because he was afraid to scare me. Keep in mind, my ex was an atheist. I felt chills go down my body. The next one didn't happen to me. It happened to my husband. Keep in mind that he is a Gulf War vet with over 20 years active duty military. Brooke Army Medical Hospital in San Antonio, Texas. Where it stands now is not where it used to be. You actually have to go on post to see the real hospital. It was abandoned many years ago. It is barricaded off, but I would like to hear more about this building. My husband went for training last year. He's a reservist now. He stayed in a hotel across from the abandoned building. After a few days he was there, he called me and told me he couldn't sleep in this haunted hotel. He stated he woke up several times to find his stuff from his closet strewn across the floor. He also said his closet was extremely cold. He also told me that there were roaches as big as tanks. I laughed most of it off until I went there. He told me that several soldiers complained about things happening to them, but no one believes them. Well, I didn't believe him until he drove me by the old hospital, and it looked like an abandoned building, barbed wire, and chains with locks. After a few passes by the hospital, he told me I needed to see the hotel. He got me into the hotel pretending I was a soldier. I felt more like a prostitute, the way the CQ looked at me. I will tell you, this place looks as if you stepped into the 30s. I swear they haven't changed the wallpaper since then. He kept telling me that when he looked out his window, the hospital would have lights on and the windows would be open. Keep in mind, this is an abandoned building. He took me to the room he stayed in, and yes, the whole room was cold. I could see the hospital from the window and no lights. When we left, I looked up at the hospital and I saw a room with lights on and a window open. I got the creeps. As we were leaving, he drove closer to it, and there was no way anyone could have gotten in there. Firstly, I guess I'm what you call a sensitive. I regularly see things, hear things, and feel things that others don't. I'm usually the first one to point out when something doesn't feel right, and I've been like this all my life. During my first year at university, I stayed at Hillhead Halls, and I had the strangest experiences. For about the first month of being there, it was fine. One day, I was walking by the kitchen, and I felt a huge blast of cold and loud whispering, which really frightened me. Seeing strange things doesn't usually bother me, because it happens quite regularly, but this really bothered me, because it felt so bad. I asked my flatmate if she had heard anything, but she said that she hadn't. Just after the Christmas holiday, I came back to the worst time of my life. Firstly, there was a man walking around my flat. He was very tall, wearing all black, including a black hat or hood, and you could not see his face. I saw him outdoors and inside the flat. He frequently had a black dog with him, which often walked by my bedroom door. My flatmate got really scared of being alone in her room, as she felt there was someone watching her from her door. It was about a week after seeing this man that electrical appliances in my room started to go wrong. My electrical alarm clock, for example, would just start to beep much louder than anything it had ever done before, and did not stop when I pulled the plug out. It has no battery backup. My printer would just print out random rubbish, even if it was not switched on, and light bulbs will blow if you looked at them for a long time. The electrical stuff would only happen in my room. Objects would disappear from my room, reappearing elsewhere in the flat. An example of this is that we lost a bread knife out in the kitchen, bearing in mind that I don't eat bread much, especially not in my bedroom. We found it on top of my wardrobe at the back, about 3 or 4 months after it got lost. At night was the worst. Me and my flatmate would drag our mattress through to my room and sleep there because we're too frightened to sleep in separate rooms. I would have the most horrendous nightmares, which I never got before and have never got since. At night there would be constant bangings, tappings, and scrapings, which sounded like they were coming from the space between the walls. I think about the worst thing that I experienced while living there was getting up one morning and walking to the window at the end of the landing and looking out at the trees that are above the river dawn. On the larger branches, there were hanged people, as in dead, with a rope around their neck, swinging in the wind. They weren't dressed in modern clothing. I wanted to run away and stop seeing it, but maybe I was too frightened because my feet wouldn't move and I found it really difficult to breathe. After this, my flatmate found staying in her room, which overlooked the river dawn, unbearable, and moved into the room next to mine. As soon as that room was locked, everything was fine, until it came to the end of the year, and she moved out. She moved out about a fortnight earlier than me, but I was spending most of my time in the flat above mine. After her moving out, I came downstairs from upstairs to find her door open and light shining through onto the landing carpet. Very bravely, I went to shut the door and switch the lights off, but just as I got there, the door slammed in my face and locked, and I heard the light switch off. I phoned my flatmate to make sure she was home, which she was. I then phoned the people from upstairs and asked them to come down, and when they got to my flat, the room wasn't locked again, but was totally empty and freezing cold. It was the summer, but you could see her breath was white. The next day when I got out of the shower, I found that the bathroom door was wide open, despite the fact that I'd locked the door, and there is no way that the lock could open itself. Also, the bathroom door was very creaky, and I hadn't heard a creak. I went to my room and got dressed as quickly as possible, but I couldn't find the key to my room so I could lock up and leave. I'd left the key in the lock on the outside of the door, but it was gone. I found it in the bathroom sink. Finally, one night, I gave my key to one of the people living upstairs to go and get me a sweater for my flat, as I was too frightened to go down. This person, who was a complete skeptic, came back upstairs completely pale, sweating cold sweats, shaking, and totally out of breath. I don't know what happened, because this person won't talk about it, and has made us all promise never to bring it up in conversation. These all sound like really weird events, but I don't smoke, drink, or do any kind of drugs, and I didn't then, but I swear they are all true. I don't want to experience anything like that again as long as I live. Thanks for letting me share this with you. My friend and I went to Alabama during our senior year in high school to visit my grandparents. Now, my grandparents lived in the middle of nowhere. Little town. You blink, you miss it. Anyway, there wasn't much to do, so one day we went exploring. Down about a half mile from my grandparents' house, at the end of the road, was a huge pasture. It hadn't been inhabited or cared for years. There was a large gate with a no trespassing sign. This made us curious to see what was hiding back there, in the middle of nowhere. We crawled under the gate and started walking. There was a gravel path and nothing else but trees, grass, and insects. We kept going for about a mile until we were in a fully wooded area. This is where the strangeness happened. First off, we stumbled across an old graveyard with only about 3 graves in it. Looked like a family. The tombstones were dated back to the early 1800s. I took photos that I can send at a later date if you'd like. Across from the graves was a waterfall. We decided to sit and take in the sight. While sitting there, we heard horse hooves galloping closely. We turned and saw nothing. A little while later, we heard what sounded like something being swung through the air near our heads. Nothing visible though. It spooked us, and we decided then that we should probably head back to the house. On the way back, we heard the horse hooves again, and this time we ran, got back to my grandparents' house, and replayed our story to my grandfather. This is where it gets spooky. He said that a while back, he stumbled across the waterfall too, and decided to sit and fish at the bank. He heard the horse too, and heard the swinging, which he described as a hatchet or something similar. Only he said that he turned and he saw a man on a white horse, carrying a machete, and appeared to be clearing the fields, but it wasn't really there, like he and the horse were transparent. He said that's when he took off running too. The only thing I can think of is that at one time, someone lived on that land, which is why they were buried there. I can tell you one thing, it spooked me then, but now I just realize that people just stayed there where their home was. I haven't had any opportunities to get back to that area, but if I do, I may go visit them. I moved to Indiana in 1986. I befriended a woman who sold real estate and said she knew of this huge house that was for rent in a small town called Lamb, Indiana. It sits directly across the river from Carrollton, Kentucky, and is halfway between Vevey and Madison, Indiana. The house was absolutely fabulous, made of stone and built circa 1800. It is told that the Native Americans taught a white man how to build the house. It became part of the Underground Railroad during the Civil War. There was a tunnel built from the Ohio River up to the basement wall, where they had knocked a hole in the wall for slaves to enter. My story starts in the fall of 1987, when my mother, my dog, and I were on the first floor in the living room, watching television. My little dog ran upstairs and was running around in circles. I could hear little toenails on the wooden planks. I felt a cold chill, like a burst of cold air, and became puzzled by it. There were no doors or windows open in the house. It was cold out, and we had built a fire in the wood stove. I went up to check on my little dog to see what she was doing, and there it was. My room had a door that led out to nothing. I assumed there was a balcony at one time, but at this time, there was no evidence of one, so the door stayed shut and locked. When I had gone upstairs, I noticed the air was more frigid, and it seemed windy. I went to my room and the door was standing open, and it looked as though a small child had breathed on the window of the door and wrote Amy's room on the window. I think the most interesting experience in this house also happened to be the most terrifying. One night, I'd been sleeping in bed with the door open when I was awakened by what I thought was my dad. I remember the door squeaked open slowly, and I heard a whisper. I couldn't hear it too clearly. All I knew was that it was some sort of talking. That's when I started to open my eyes slowly and saw what appeared to be a nun with an axe on her head, kneeling down and praying in front of my bed. I screamed. My parents rushed into the room, and I told them I saw something. My dad did his best to reassure me that everything was okay, and after I explained what had happened to me, I feel like he was just as creeped out as I was, even though he tried not to show it. Well, that even frightened my dad, to the point at which he told me he couldn't sleep the rest of the night. I ended up falling asleep, and my dad stayed up. He told me he went to the bathroom and turned on the light, when all of a sudden, it went out. Needing to use the bathroom, he grabbed one of the flashlights we had. When he shined the flashlights towards the mirror to wash his hands, he looked at the mirror for a second, only to notice an old man's face right behind him. He only saw this for a few seconds, but he couldn't forget the man's face. He had 3 large gashes on the side of his face, like he had been mauled by a tiger. Claw marks. He was a balding man, with gray hair only on the side of his face, and he looked about 70s. Of course, when the bathroom light came on, there was nothing there anymore. The basement had some creepy occurrences as well. You would hear a very young voice, often singing softly, not super loud. In fact, very faint, but a voice was there. When you'd get downstairs and into the basement, you wouldn't hear it anymore, but it was always something you heard whenever you were in other parts of the house. About a year or so later, we had some family staying with us for the weekend, and my cousin set up a large tape recorder in the basement to see if there were any noises. My little nieces and 3 friends bedded down in the living room by the wood stove to stay warm, and we all went to bed. The next morning, one of the little girls thanked my dad for stocking the fire that night because it was getting kinda chilly. My dad hadn't been downstairs all night. My cousin went down to the basement to get the tape recorder, reel to reel by the way, brought it back upstairs, and played it back to us. You could vividly hear a little girl say "Mommy." My family lived in that house for almost 15 years. This is a wonderfully chilling and rather classic, if that can be said, Scottish tale ghost experience. My mother, who was attending university in St. Andrews, Scotland, was walking home from a party. It was about 11 o'clock on a chilly November night. It should be noted beforehand that St. Andrews was, centuries ago, the religious capital of Scotland, and the ruins of the great cathedral still stand in the middle of the town. Anyhow, she decided to take a shortcut to the dorms. Instead of taking the road, she began to make her way through the soccer pitches. These were surrounded by spinneys of trees. As she crossed the fields, she noticed what appeared to be 3 policemen at the road at the end of the pitch, where she was heading. Though not that close, she could see that they wore heavy clothes, like the Scottish policemen's coats traditionally worn in the winter. She didn't want to be found by them at that late hour, and went to the nearby trees to hide. To her chagrin, they began to move towards the center of the field, though not directly at her. She stayed put. As they came closer, she realized that they were walking on the air, about 3 feet above the ground. Furthermore, they were not policemen, but monks in clerical robes. 2 of them were supporting a third in the middle, who seemed to be wounded. They passed only a few yards away from her, so that she saw them very clearly. Oddly, their feet moved very slowly, but they were moving through the air very quickly. When they came about parallel to her, my mother, mad with fear, ran as fast as she could back to the dorms, clearing a fence that was as high as her, with one leap on the way. A violent wind kicked up against her as she ran, as if trying to blow her back. The next day, she went back to where it happened. At the very spot where the 3 monks had passed near to her, she found 3 black cats eating the carcass of a rabbit that they had just killed. In another note, the mystery as to why the apparitions were floating is easily solved. The ground was leveled in order to make a proper playing field. The monks were simply walking on their own terrain, as it would have been in medieval times, 3 feet higher than the leveled field. My family has had many paranormal experiences. When my mother was a child, they purchased a house near Martins Ferry, Ohio, that had some strange occurrences there. My uncle was in his room asleep, and woke up in the middle of the night to find an old woman in a rocking chair sitting in the corner of his room. He said she told him to get out of her house. My uncle was so frightened, he literally dragged his mattress into my mother's room and refused to ever sleep in his room again. My mother-in-law also saw the woman and can vouch that she was real. My great-grandmother would also see a small black devil-like creature with glowing red eyes outside her window at night. None of my family's pets lived very long in that house either. Their fish were found dead in their tank one morning. All of them. Here's the thing though, the water was somehow boiling hot. My mother's hamster was found dead in its cage too, and I've been told it looked like something had maybe scared it to death from the expression on its face. Also, every night, my grandmother would dream that the house was on fire and they couldn't get out. After living in the house for 6 months, they moved out. The day after they had moved out, the house caught fire and was almost burned to the ground. To this day, my aunt still has ghost experiences. At one of their old houses, they would turn out all the lights, lock the doors, and would come home to find that every light in the house was on. I never felt comfortable being alone in the house upstairs. I would feel like someone was watching me when there was no one else upstairs. And in the house they live in now, they were in bed one night when they heard a blood-curdling scream coming from their living room. They ran into the living room to find nobody there, and all the doors in the house were unlocked when they knew that they had been locked before they went to bed. Also, my aunt was in bed, and someone told her that her baby's daughter's face was covered by her blanket, but no one else was home. I swear this is absolutely the truth. I wanted to share my family's stories with other people, so they can know that maybe they are not alone out there. Hello, my name is Naomi, and I've had several paranormal stories to share. Ever since I was young, I've always been terrified of the paranormal, and I have had terrifying, vivid dreams. As a child, I would frequently awake to see a dark, shadowy figure standing by the doorframe of my bedroom. I would feel a presence behind me when I would walk upstairs at night. At a slightly older age, I dismissed the possibility of ghosts because I figured it was impossible, but later I had a change of heart when I went to this haunted yard. I'd heard many stories about a small yard where strange things had occurred. One night, I thought it might be interesting to go take a look at it and see what all the fuss was about. The yard is almost impossible to find, totally surrounded by trees. If you are able to find it, go there in winter. The snow is always perfect, not a single flaw. If it's a windy night, there will be no wind within the yard. The freaky part about it is that there is an old building which used to be an insane asylum, now abandoned. It's boarded up, but one night we opened it up, and we heard a faint barking of dogs from within, but there were no dogs anywhere nearby. Next to it, there is a small trailer. No one lives in the trailer, but a light and the TV are always on. There is an old swing on the yard. If you watch it for long enough, it will begin to swing slightly. The strangest part is that there are 2 old Native American tombstones. Every time you go back, they've been redug and moved to another location on the yard. I'm not sure if any of this is ghost related, but it certainly is freaky. An incident happened to me this evening as well. I was walking with some of my friends along the railroad tracks in my town. On the street next to the tracks, 100 years ago, there was a man who went insane, killed his family, and was hanged in the courtyard. Anyway, tonight, as we were walking, we all of a sudden simultaneously stopped and looked at each other terrified. We all felt a strange presence brushing against our backs. Later, we were sharing stories about screams people frequently hear coming back from the park. We decided to sit out on the deck of my friend's house, who lives right by the park. We were just sitting around, talking, when we hear the scream of a little girl, as if she was being murdered, coming from across the park. We randomly ran inside. Once inside, we began to share ghost stories. One of my friends believes his house is haunted. He always feels things in his room when he is sleeping. With one particular experience, Back in winter, he would wake up in the morning with claw marks in his shirts and slight scratches on his back. This happened about 6 times. Another time, he woke up and all of his blankets were totally flipped upside down, but looked as though they had been untouched. He talked to his grandmother about it because she is able to communicate with the dead, and she visited their house and told the spirits to leave. Since then, there have been no strange occurrences. I work in a nursing home and didn't believe in ghosts till I was offered a night shift position. One of the girls said that the home was pretty bad with spirits, but I thought because of my age, 19, she was just trying to scare me. I was walking alone after answering a buzzer past the dining room when someone touched my shoulder. I turned around and no one was there. I was convinced it was the other 2 girls, but they were in the lounge and couldn't have got there without me seeing them. Later, we were sitting talking when the door, which is a fire door and doesn't move, was slamming and opening for about a minute and abruptly stopped. We all got out of our seats, don't know why, and then a black figure appeared at the door and just stared at us for about a minute and walked off. The eldest girl went after it, so we followed, and no one was there. We sat down to calm ourselves because we were pretty freaked out by that, when the emergency buzzers started going off simultaneously from one room to 30, but there are patients who can't reach them, and others on medication, so we went and turned them off and checked our residents. We went to one lady who was dying of cancer, and I turned off the buzzer when my coworker said she was gone. We can only think this was her having a laugh, because she was a great lady, or she was trying to let us know she was gone. That also wasn't the first time someone passed away before we were aware of it. I had a coworker once who could have sworn she was talking to an old woman at the clinic that had been at the nursing home for nearly a decade. This coworker had gone on vacation, and this was her first day back. There was a figure laying in bed, in a room alone. She was facing away from my coworker, and she had the door cracked open for a second to see if the woman wanted anything to eat. There was no response, so she figured the lady was just cranky and didn't want to be bothered. A few hours later, she went back to the room, and nobody was there. My coworker asked another why the patient was missing. The other coworker looked puzzled. Did nobody tell you that Miss Noble passed away in her sleep while you were on vacation? My other coworker said, well, then why was there somebody in the room a few hours ago? She found out that nobody moved into the new room since Miss Noble passed away. They tried moving a patient in there for a couple of days, but we would hear him scream bloody murder for no explicable reason. But again, they took him out right away, and way before my coworker returned to work. My coworker insisted that she saw a figure in that room, and that she wasn't tired or feeling unwell. This might end up kind of being long, since I'm going to try to cover a lot of what I experienced in my life. I will start with the first thing that I remember. I was about 4 or 5 years old. I was sitting in my bedroom getting some coloring books. It was summer, and the window was open. I heard this noise, and at first, I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I looked towards the window, and the sound faded. It sounded sort of like a lawnmower. Well, I went back to what I was doing, and the noise just got louder. I realized the noise wasn't coming from my window, but from the other side of my room, where the closet was. I looked over and saw this black orb hovering over the molding of the closet. It was moving in this swaying motion, and the noise I was hearing came from the black orb. I screamed and curled up into a ball. I continued to scream until my mom reached my bedroom. She looked terrified and kept asking me what was wrong. Well, my little brain could only assume it was a black bee, which she didn't find amusing. She said she thought someone was trying to kill me because of how I was screaming. From that point on, I read everything I could get my hands on about ghosts. Nothing happened for many years after the first incident. My father was in the military, and we moved from Atlanta to Minot, North Dakota, my sophomore year of high school. I'm not going to get into everything that happened down there, since it was a daily occurrence down there, no matter where in town I was. In brief, let's just say the blacker than black negative things. Everywhere. Luckily, the people that I normally hang out with saw them too, so I didn't feel like I was going crazy. They ranged in height from being 1 foot to over 7 feet. There was one we nicknamed Split Toes. Keep in mind, there were more than one of them. I lived in Minot for just under 1 year, and I'll never step foot there again. On top of the shadows, there were many other things that happened, ranging from smells to noises to the absolute feel of being chased, the fear. My sister even saw them, though it traumatized her so badly she shut down and now says she didn't. Now I know this sounds crazy, but I know there are other people out there that have experienced these things. I know that what happened down there was not an overactive imagination. We all from time to time will wake up with cuts we couldn't explain, or have them appear out of nowhere, sometimes singular, sometimes looking like a tiny clawed hand that hit us, and rarely bite marks. We were told by a friend's mother to wear sage and little leather bags for protection. I still wear one, even though I'm back in Alaska. After Minot, things slowed down a lot. I had a few more experiences with the shadows. After a while, I had enough, though. I yelled at them and told them if they agreed to leave me alone, I would pretend they didn't exist, and it has been pretty much quiet ever since. The last time I had an experience like that was out in Cooper Landing, Alaska, just a few years ago. I left Minot almost 8 years ago. My friend invited me and a few other people to her parents' cabin for the night. We drove out there from Anchorage at around 8 p.m. in the winter. I don't know if you're familiar with Alaska seasons and such, but in the winter, it's hardly ever light out. Maybe a couple hours a day during the time period we went out there. So anyways, we drive out to Cooper Landing in the dark on really icy roads. We finally get out there, and at first sight, this place made me nervous. I was determined to have a good time, so I forgot my initial feeling on the cabin. The night went well. The cabin was set up in a very open layout. There was a wall that went halfway across in the middle of the cabin, with the living room on one side and 3 sets of bunk beds on the other. Come to find out, it used to be her grandmother's cabin before she died. Well, we all decided to go to sleep. My friend and her boyfriend pulled out the futon in the living room and went to sleep. Me and my boyfriend were lying on the bunk bed, where we could look into the side of the cabin where the living room was. We were just talking, and then all of a sudden, we started to hear this noise. It started by the living room, but outside, and worked its way around the cabin. But the noise would continue to come from everywhere it had already been. It was sort of like wailing. It reminded me of what a banshee might sound like. I was really freaking out, and asking my boyfriend what the hell that was. He said it was a ghost crying. I looked out to where the living room was, and this thing started to appear, starting at the top and kind of whirlwinding down. My boyfriend saw it, and leapt to the bunk bed directly across and was freaking out. I started demanding he go and turn the light on. It wouldn't stop until he did. Finally he did, and the thing disappeared. My friend woke up and told us things like that always happen out there, and we just needed to get used to it. I was really upset she didn't tell me. Neither me or my boyfriend could sleep till it got light outside. Nothing else happened that night, but I have no desire to try my luck again. Since then, I haven't had any encounters with anything that appeared as a shadow. I've seen ghosts that appear like people look, in color, and they don't scare me at all. I'm not sure what the black things are, and I'm not sure I want to know. I do know that as long as I don't think about them, I don't have any problems with them. Oh, I almost forgot. Oklunta is a really creepy place up there. Not the cemetery, but the village, or what's left of it. I only got to spend about 15 minutes out there, but that was more than enough to feel it out. Very bad vibes out there. And as we were leaving, I saw something back in the trees. As soon as I looked at it, it darted behind a tree. It was dark out, so I didn't know what it was, but it didn't look like a person. And when we were driving back to Anchorage, on the outbound side of the highway there was an accident, and this huge bull moose was on the side of the road dead. But none of the vehicles looked like they had hit it. A moose hitting your car would crumple it like a soda can. Well, that's all I have for this morning. Maybe sometime I'll go more in depth about my experience in Mano, but not yet. I don't like talking about it when it's dark outside. It all started when I was about 5. There was a thunderstorm, and I hate storms, so I went to my parents' room across the hall. After the storm was over, I decided to go back to my room. When I got to the doorway, I saw 2 figures sitting in 2 of my chairs. I had a little table and tea set in the middle of my room, and they were just sitting there. One of them was facing me, and it looked like a pitch black shadow. The other had its back to me. I wasn't sure if it was real, so I blinked my eyes very tight multiple times. The one whose back was facing me slowly turned around to look at me. It was white, kind of fuzzy looking, like the way your TV looks when it gets all snowy in the TV set, and had 2 black holes where the eyes should be, and an outline of the nose and mouth. I think the best way to call it is a static man. I got scared and ran and told my father what I saw. He told me that our grandfather tends to watch over us. He passed away years ago. He even said he saw this dark shadow hovering over his bed one night, although it was pretty dark, so he could barely make out anything. I later found out that an old couple originally lived in the house before my parents bought it in the 70s. The original house is small, 2 bedrooms, and a kitchen, a small living room. It was only 1 story, and when my parents moved in, they said the old man died. They heard voices a few times, but didn't think anything of it. Then, when me and my brothers were born, they built a basement and 2nd story where the bedrooms are. My bedroom and my parents' bedroom are right above the original part of the house. My room used to be the attic until we built the upstairs. I think the ghosts were my grandfather and the old man, but I keep seeing the same ghost when I go places. I'm never scared though. Also, we've had things fly across the room. Things shatter out of nowhere, hear noises, and I've had experiences where I felt a presence in the room, and then I saw a crease in the couch right next to where I was sitting. I'm not scared though, because I just have a feeling they don't intend on hurting me. It actually makes me feel safer at times. Hi, I've enjoyed your website and wish to share one of my experiences. This is all true, and if you have any comments about ghosts or questions, please feel free to email me, as I'd like to know what it might have been. When I was 12 or so, I had a strange experience. I was playing with my friend in the woods near the Quibbin Aqueduct. This is in Wayland, Massachusetts. We had to take our neighbor's police dog on our adventure, looking for the Indian artifacts. On a hill that was gravelly, I found what I believed to be an arrowhead. After showing it to my friend, I stuffed it into my pants pocket and moved to a new spot with the dog. He began to wind towards some bushes about 20 feet away. I looked in the direction the dog was looking and saw nothing. Figuring it was a rabbit or squirrel, I let the dog off his leash. He began barking and ran into the bushes. My friend joined me, and we called the dog back. He came right away, being well trained. He sat looking from us to the woods and panting. We put his leash back on, and both my friend and I had the feeling of being watched. I reached into my pants to see the arrowhead, but it was gone. I checked the other pockets. Nothing. Then we decided to go home. Both of us creeped out. On our way back, the dog stopped at a tree and looked up, and at least 30 feet up, we saw a piece of bloody fur stuck to the tree. We ran back to the neighbors and returned the dog, not wanting to get laughed at. We didn't tell him about the fur. My friend got her bike and went halfway to me to my house. When I got in the door, the phone rang. It was my friend. She asked if I was okay. I was fine. I told her. Then she'd explained she'd seen someone lurking in the bushes of the only empty house in my neighborhood, and they seemed to be following me. I dismissed it and ate dinner. That night, a storm came. The thunder and lightning woke me up. During a flash of light, I saw a tall, thin figure at the foot of my bed. I think it was a man. He wore all black, a long, odd jacket, and had very long arms. They reached his knees. On his head was a stovepipe hat that was too high and had a wide brim, so his face was shadowed. As I looked at him, too terrified to scream, he raised his arms and pointed at me with the long finger. Another flash of light, and he was gone. In the morning at school before homeroom, I asked my friend to describe the person she had seen the day before in the bushes. She said he was thin and had a weird hat like Lincoln wore. Of course, I was freaked out. I don't know how much later, maybe a month or more, I was doing homework on my bed and heard scuffling in my closet, thinking it was the cat. I opened the door to scoot him out. The cat was not there, but the clothes were swaying side by side. I closed the door and left my room. The next and last time I saw the ghost was at summer camp. I had been put into a room alone, having had a panic attack over an incident in which I had a dream come true. I dreamt a kid got run over by a van, and a storm came and a cabin was hit by lightning, and kids burnt up. That day, we were teamed up and competing for ribbons. One event was the van pull. A team of kids were pulling a van. A kid fell under, and the van went over him. He was unhurt, but the license plate made a dirty mark on his back. I got scared, and then it began raining very hard. Everyone headed to their cabins. It began to lightning, and I lost my mind. I'd confided my dream to my friend that morning, and as she tried to tell the counselor, I was crying and trying to warn the people about the fire I believed to be about to happen. The counselor locked me in her room, alone. A blast of thunder and lightning hit and blew the outside door open. Rain poured in, and in the storm, stood my ghost looking in at me. I screamed and slammed the door shut. Luckily, fire never happened. I never saw the ghost again. I often wonder about it, and as scary as it was, it never hurt me. Please note, I know the story sounds far-fetched, but it isn't. This really happened. Hi, Sam here. I've apparently spoke to a ghost when I was 2 years old. To cut a long story short, I moved to Invicta Road in Charnes, Kent when I was 2 years old, with my dad. A year or so before we moved in, a lonely pregnant woman lived there and offed herself by hanging. Because of the pregnancy in the back room, no one lived there till my dad and I slept in the back bedroom. My dad told me that he would often hear me talking to someone at nights in my room. My dad asked me who I was talking to. I said it was the gray lady who sits at the end of my bed. My dad then met my stepmom, and she moved in with us. At nights, sometimes my stepmom and I would sit alone, and she'd hear walking around upstairs and things being moved about. It was so bad, one night, that she went over to her parents' house to get them. They brought their dog over. The dog started growling and barking for no reason. My dad moved me out of the back bedroom to another bedroom when I started to get upset, and not sleepiness. Dreams and anxiety are my main feelings I get. I can't walk through a graveyard without getting anxiety, and I also smell a really musty smell that no one else seems to notice. It's so intoxicating that it makes me feel like I'm suffocating, and it makes me feel sick. Sometimes it makes me wonder whether I still have this woman following me. I was recently staying at a youth hostel in Cornwall, England. The manager warned me jovially when I arrived that there were 3 ghosts in the hostel, all linked to different areas in the building. He added with a mischievous grin that one of them had a particular dislike for the new computer that had been installed and seemed to keep switching it off. He chose to tell me this because the reason I was there was to do some work with that very computer. After an evening of unproductive work on the computer that obviously wasn't working properly, I retired to the small private room I had been given. I dropped off to sleep fairly quickly, but woke up after about an hour feeling cold, the reason for which became clear very quickly. The duvet from my bed was lying in a heap on the floor around my feet. I picked it up and covered myself, but then had trouble getting back to sleep, as the couple in the next room were being very noisy. Eventually, they quieted down, and I started to relax, but before I managed to fall asleep again, the duvet began to slowly slide down the bed, as if pulled from the bottom. I let it move about 6 inches to see what was happening, then got hold and pulled back. Whatever was pulling gave up with relative ease, and I was soon covered again. At this stage, I can remember that rather than being frightened, I felt as if some silly game was going on, and I was almost giggling about the fact that some impish ghost had chosen me for an adversary in its little game. As a result, after a half hour or so, I had no trouble getting back to sleep. It seemed, however, that I hadn't taken things seriously enough and had managed to cause offense. The next time I woke up, it was with a startle, as the duvet began to quickly slide off the bed, again, in the same direction towards my feet. This time, I decided that enough was enough, and started to feel very afraid. You know what it's like in the dark at night. A simple duvet can seem to offer so much protection and security, and the potential lack of it made me feel very vulnerable. I think I managed to move about an inch before I found myself suddenly unable to move anymore. I couldn't actually feel any force or weight holding me or pressing down on me, but I was totally unable to move my arms or any part of my upper body except for my head. In fact, it felt like it was suddenly made from lead. I was then greeted by an old man's laugh. I had literally heard a very slow guttural sounding laugh, and it sounded far from pleasant. I fought and eventually managed to get my fingers to move slightly. As soon as I achieved this one small movement, everything was fine. The inability to move evaporated quickly, and I was left back in full control of my body. I stood right side up, surveying the entire room, and what I saw next terrified me. There were a pair of red eyes looking at me by the door for about 30 seconds before fading away. Just then, the door opened, and there was a light mist that moved through the door and then evaporated. I screamed, "I'm not afraid of you, and that tonight's rest will be a peaceful night's rest." I pulled the duvet back over myself, and surprisingly, only felt any kind of fear for a few minutes, and was soon relaxing again. Whatever the game was about, it seems that I had won, and that my adversary had admitted defeat fairly gracefully. I slept peacefully well for the remaining few hours of the night, and woke up perfectly refreshed in the morning. Since I was a little girl, my sisters and I have had frightening experiences with spirits. When I was 6, my family and I moved to a fairly new house, only 8 years old at the time, in West Texas. As far back as I can remember, we had strange things going on in that house. First off, at night, if you were to go through the hallway to get to my parents' room, you would always hear what sounded like a TV. You could hear voices and sometimes music. Most of the time, my parents' TV was off. If you left the room and stood in the hallway again, the sounds would be gone. Secondly, when I would try to go to sleep at night, I would always have that classic "someone's watching me" feeling. I always blamed it on me being a young child. The house was a very scary place to be at night. Wherever you went, someone was watching you. Friends who have spent the night rarely stayed twice. The areas of the house that scared everyone the worst were the hallway to my parents' room and my older sister's closet. The closet always had a feeling of hate radiating from it. I tried to spend a night in there with my scared sister, and it didn't last. I was sleeping on the floor with my head next to the closet, and that just wasn't a good feeling. I went back to my room after she fell asleep. A couple years after we moved in, my younger sister had a frightening experience. Her and I shared a bedroom with our beds parallel to each other, with a nightstand in between us. We were about 3 feet apart. One night, I woke up to her screaming my name. I woke up and asked what was wrong. She told me that, for no reason at all, she woke up and looked over at my bed. Laying at the foot of my bed was a light blue glowing figure of a woman. Her eyes were gone, and her mouth hung open. My sister described her as looking dead. My sister also added that she couldn't see me anywhere on the bed, so she started screaming my name and closed her eyes. When she opened them, I was awake, asking her what was wrong. She told me, and I looked down at the foot of my bed, and my huge stuffed animal that I had there every night was sparking like it had really bad static electricity. I took it off my bed and threw it in my bathroom sink and ran water over it. Being young, I thought it would help. Years later, my family and I moved to southern Louisiana and moved into a gated subdivision. One night, my 2 sisters were mad at me and left the house to go on a walk. I followed them without them knowing. I followed them up to the front gate of the subdivision and talked to them for a minute. They quickly left in a huff, being that they were still angry with me. For what? I don't remember now. I stayed by the gate for a couple of minutes afterwards, and then decided to run to the end of the main street and hide behind some bushes that faced the gate. I waited for my sisters to walk by, and when they did, unaware where I was hiding, stopped remotely in front of the bushes. I heard a younger sister say, "What is Jenny, me, doing, sitting on top of that stop sign? The stop sign is located next to the gate." After that, they walked on. I was a bit confused and was about to chase after them, but then, through the leaves, I saw a shadow of someone running past the bushes I was behind. I could also hear the sound of footsteps. I stood up quickly to see who was there. No one was in sight. After this, I ran to my sisters and told them what I had seen. They then told me that they saw me, or what looked like me, sitting on top of the stop sign. They said I had a very angry, disfiguring grin. After we traded stories, we ran home quickly. Later, my younger sister told me that the ghost she saw in my bed and the ghost she saw on the sign both looked exactly like me. It all began around the 1st of June this very year. The incident took place in my grandmother and grandfather's home. My grandfather had been diagnosed with cancer. In the summer of 1998, I didn't know that those last few months would be the last time I would ever see him alive. During that period of time, I had spent a whole lot of time with my grandparents, and it felt like I had actually gotten a little closer to them both, but particularly my grandfather. At the end of the summer, I left and went back home. Subsequently, about 5 months later, our family received a disturbing phone call. It was from my grandmother, informing us about the passing of our grandfather. He had passed away in the hospital, which was the very last place that our grandfather lived in before his passing. A month and a half after we had been staying there, I noticed that something just didn't feel right. The whole atmosphere had changed. I decided to take the guest room. For some reason, I always got the feeling that I was being watched in the guest room. Then, other little occurrences started to evolve. The very first was, I always felt like somebody was standing over my shoulder. I started to notice scars on my back after I would awake in the mornings. I would feel like touches on my back. My mom and brother both complained about the door handles being rattling and opening and closing really fast. Cabinet doors would fly open, and the pots and pans would all fall out. My hair would get pulled in the night. Diminutive objects would fall from midair, such as paper, hair clips, and coins, and I would hear voices, one of which said "wake up" very loudly in my ear. I would see mists and rays of light shoot past me extremely fast. So fast, in fact, I would hear a whoosh of air. I would notice some of my belongings missing, such as my CDs, jewelry, money, to name a few, usually belongings that I would use around the house. I would feel my bed move, as if someone were to bump into it during the night, flickering lights, and last, but certainly not least, since animals can sometimes see things humans cannot see, my cat would turn her head really fast and just stare at something, which I would not be able to see for a significant amount of time. A little while later, about a month after being there, I saw the unthinkable. After I'd been sound asleep for about 7 hours or so, I woke up suddenly to a spirit at the foot of my bed, and it was my grandfather. I could not believe what I was seeing, but I will describe this to you in full detail.
There was no doubt in my mind that this was actually a spirit. He was shadowy like, but his clothing was colored. He would always wave at me, and sure enough, he was waving my direction with a smile on his face. It was plain to see that he was trying to get my attention. He just wanted to see me. I was too afraid to move a muscle, in fear that in spite of everything else that he would approach me. I'd never seen anything like this before in my entire life. I didn't want to tell this to anyone though. I thought that maybe nobody would believe me or listen. About a week later, I was in the kitchen with my mom, and she told me that the guest room was where our grandpa had stayed in before he died, because he was too ill. That explains the reason why that very room felt like the most eerie room in the house. I almost fainted when I discovered that, but I knew that a spirit can travel anywhere in the home, even outside or in back of the house. But it wasn't until a month later that I decided to come out with the news. I first confided in my mom and my brother, and my mother believed me, because she said that before I brought up anything that I'd said. Our grandmother had experienced the exact same thing, that he was at the foot of the bed watching over her and smiling. I had a phone conversation with her, and I let her do all the talking first, and everything that she told me measured up with my experience, and it only happened to my grandmother and I, whom he was the closest with before he passed away. Everyone was wondering why I didn't scream or attempt to run out of the guest room as soon as I saw him, but I was too afraid. Whenever you're that close to something like that, it just takes your breath away completely. I was in my own little calm. It felt very uncomfortable. It wasn't until I started sleeping on the living room sofa that I felt appeased, albeit this has not been my first experience. Ever since the age of 5, my family and I started traveling around a lot, and we would move here and there. I've went to 9 different schools total. I'm 17 now. In previous homes, I've experienced a whole lot. I lived in a haunted house for a total of 3 years. Not only by all of the experiences that I've endured, I've been doing many researches involving the paranormal. I'm really good at picking up on things too, which I've found out. There was this one house that we went into that we were thinking about purchasing, but I felt like something was wrong. There were several rooms in the home that I could just not stop venturing off into. The main ones were the master bedroom and the study. After I left the house, I told my parents that someone from the house must have passed away. So my mom went to go look up the history of the house, and sure enough, the owner and his wife on a trip to California got killed in a car wreck, and they lived in the master bedroom, and the owner spent most of his time in the study. After I was enlightened with that information, I was in disbelief. I still am to this day too. My mom told me that it goes back to her being Jewish and Indian. She said that she can pick up on and see things too. She claims that it's an Indian thing, but I don't know. Maybe it is. Anyways, God bless everyone, and thank you for your time. Great website, by the way. I'm a current visitor. When I was in high school, my family lived in a rented farmhouse in the country. I was 17 and dating a very nice gentleman who had come to visit me for the evening. My mother worked nights and usually got home around 11 p.m. or so. My boyfriend and I were sitting on the floor in the living room, leaned up against the couch watching TV, when the kitchen door opened and the light came on. We both heard a thump like my mother had put her purse on the table, and then the bathroom door opened and closed. We both thought that was odd, because usually my mother would not have turned on the light, because my dad is a light sleeper, and the light would have woke him up, and my mother would have at least said hi to us anyway. My boyfriend noticed that it was getting late, and he needed to get home. We had expected snow, and he didn't want to be caught in a storm. I got his coat and we walked to the door together and stood on the back porch watching the snowfall. As my mother pulled in, my boyfriend made us both wait on the porch as he searched the house from one end to the other. No one was in there other than my sister, upstairs asleep, and my dad, who was sound asleep in the back bedroom. Many other things happened there. One night, me and my boyfriend decided to play the Ouija board to summon the spirit that was residing in the house. I remember it was a blizzard that day, and my entire family except for me were in another state visiting my extended family. We were asking questions about the spirit. At first we asked its name. Nothing happened. Then we asked if we were bothering him. Still nothing. After nearly 20 minutes of continuously trying to get in touch with someone, my boyfriend angrily grabbed the planchette and Ouija board and threw it out of the window. He said he had enough of this make-believe and that he was really starting to get tested. I told him he shouldn't have done that he could really upset whatever was living in the house. My boyfriend mockingly says, "Sure, why doesn't this stupid spirit just possess me if it even exists? Make some real noise." My boyfriend gets frustrated and ends up sleeping on the couch because he was tired of playing games. Later that night, around 3 a.m., I was awakened in the middle of the night to hear my telephone landline ringing. The only problem was, there was no landline telephone here. We all had our cell phones, and they were on silent. Seconds later, I hear loud pounding on the door to my bedroom, and it's slightly opened. I yell out to my boyfriend, but there was no answer. I hear the phone ringing again, but I couldn't locate the sound. Then, everything fell silent. Not a second later, I hear a gargling noise coming from the living room, mixed with prayer. It was coming from my boyfriend's mouth. He was violently whispering in his sleep. What really got me, though, is I went to see my boyfriend on the couch. There was this very dark cloud floating above him for a few seconds. It disappeared, and then I heard my boyfriend choking, so I ran towards him. He was literally pale in the face, almost as if he stopped breathing. That's when I realized he did seem to stop breathing. I frantically shaked him, yelling at him to wake up. I started getting scared, and I cried. This time, my phone went off, and someone was on the other line. All I heard was what sounded like a low voice saying "call," and the phone call disconnected. This was on my cell phone. I then called the paramedics. They arrive. Paramedics were in my house, checking my boyfriend's pulse. That's when he wakes up, delirious, but confused. He asked me what's going on. After talking with the paramedics and my boyfriend, they were convinced that he had a panic attack in his sleep, and they ended up leaving. But he told me something very scary. He said that while he was asleep, he had this odd dream that someone was trying to get him to go to the afterlife with them. There was this hooded figure who said nothing to him. He was just motioning towards the sky, and then all of a sudden, he was in a cemetery and saw himself in a coffin dead. I told him, "This all makes sense because you threaten the spirits." This is 100% true, and all I have is my word. But believe me, these events happened. I can't explain the mysterious phone call. I'm sure that my boyfriend challenged the spirit to make some noise, because it certainly made some noise.
Let you know that I hope you enjoyed this great compilation of the best stories of the past month. Obviously, this is the best stories that you can get from the past month from my channel, so I really hope you hit that subscribe button if you haven't subscribed yet, and liked it and shared across media, social media. Wow, I can't talk. I guess being a recluse for all these days after, being in isolation for a long time actually really affects me. But no, really, guys, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed the stories. Let me know in the comment section below how you're doing and what you thought of the stories if you hadn't heard them before. Or just, let me know you exist anyways by saying something in the comment section. Literally, you can say something, like literally SOMETHING. If I spell that wrong, I'll look really stupid, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, guys, love you so much, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.